A cold wind drifts across the silent highway as Mara Ellison stumbles from her dented car, her breath fogging in the pale glow of the street lamps, her mind spinning in a daze of confusion, dread, and a rising scream she cannot release. Beside her, the crumpled form on the asphalt seems unreal, like a nightmare, half remembered and fading, yet the moment her trembling eyes focus she feels the world tilt as though pulled into some dark chasm she cannot escape. Mara had always been the bright flame in every room, a woman with laughter in her voice and warmth in her step, but tonight every flicker of that light has been smothered, replaced with a sinking heaviness that claws at her ribs. Billy, her husband, the man she promised to love through storms and shadows, lies motionless before her, and her voice cracks in a whisper only the night can hear. She steps closer, her hands shaking, and all she can think of is how moments ago they had argued about nothing and everything, how he followed her after she rushed away, angry, confused, and unaware of how much wine still lingered in her veins. The distant wail of an approaching siren wraps around her like a tightening rope, fear rising as the truth presses in. She does not remember the impact, she barely remembers the drive, only flashes, nothing solid enough to grasp, and in that wavering haze a terrible question begins to carve its way into her mind as the sirens draw nearer. What if she is the one who caused this? What if the darkness closing around her is blue lights shatter the quiet night as officers rush onto the scene, their steps echoing across wet pavement, and for a moment Mara feels as though she has been split from her own body, watching from somewhere far above as hands guide her aside, as voices blur into distant waves of sound, her heartbeat thundering like a desperate drum. The lead officer leans toward the still form on the ground, and Mara strains to hear, but every word dissolves into the fog, swirling through her mind only the shapes matter, the bowed heads, the slow movements, the heavy silence that settles like ash. The world spins, and she shuts her eyes, trying to remember another version of this night, one where Billy would rise laughing, brushing off dirt, calling her ridiculous for worrying, but no such image comes, only a hollow ache that swells inside her chest. The officer approaches Mara, studying her with eyes that search for truth and secrets and the hidden spaces where guilt may live. He asks her to walk in a straight line, and she tries, but the ground ripples under her feet and her balance wavers, sending a ripple of panic across the onlookers. The officer nods slowly, and Mara feels ice bloom along her spine. The truth is no longer a whisper, it is a scream, silent and suffocating, and as the officer steps closer Mara senses that something more lies beneath this night, something unseen, something waiting to rise from the shadows. As they lead Mara toward the patrol car, the wind carries faint voices from the paramedics huddled around Billy's still form, and though she cannot make out their words, their movements grow slower, heavier, more resigned, and her world collapses further inside itself. She remembers fragments of the drive headlight stretching into endless ribbons, the will trembling in her hands, the echo of Billy calling her name from somewhere behind her, though she cannot recall if it was before or after she crossed into that dark stretch of road. She wonders if she swerved, if she braked, if she even saw him, or if her memory is stitching illusions to hide a truth too jagged to face. At the station, harsh lights wash over her like a judgment, the air thick and heavy, and she feels trapped not by the walls but by the unraveling within her. The detective's voice is steady, deliberate, as he asks her to recount the events, but every attempt to speak sends her deeper into panic, her words collapsing into broken fragments. Inside her mind she can feel something missing, a piece of the night stolen or buried, leaving only raw fear in its place, as though someone has twisted her memories, reshaping them into shadows that cling to her thoughts. She senses there is more to this night than a tragic accident, something darker lurking behind every half-remembered moment. Hours later, as dawn begins to bleed across the horizon, the detective returns with a strange heaviness in his step, and Mara braces herself for the verdict she already fears, but instead of blunt certainty he brings unease. He tells her quietly that something is not adding up, that the angle of impact, the position of Billy's body, and the tire marks suggest a possibility that chills her to the bone. He says there may have been another vehicle on the road, one that left no trace yet altered the scene enough to distort the truth. Mara blinks, her breath catching as a tremor crawls through her. The idea feels unreal, but it grips her tightly as the detective lays photographs on the table, images of the roadway, faint patterns in the gravel, the slightest hint of another movement intersecting the path between her and Billy. Mara stares at them, her mind flickering with memories she did not know she carried, like silhouettes behind a curtain. She remembers a flash of light behind her, the sense of pressure The sudden jolt before everything dissolved into chaos. The detective watches her reaction with growing intensity as if he too feels a shadow passing through the room, something unseen but undeniably present. Mara feels her fear shifting, changing shape, no longer confined to guilt but expanding into uncertainty, into the chilling possibility that she was never alone on that road. When they release Mara on bail, she returns to the highway at dusk, pressed by an instinct she cannot explain, and as headlights sweep past she walks along the gravel, tracing the marks in the earth, her breath shallow, the air dense with dread. She kneels beside the patch where Billy was found, and something inside her stirs, a faint memory emerging like a ghost rising from the mist. She recalls a sound not from her car but behind her, a heavy roar that surged closer. Before veering away, her pulse quickens as she steps farther down the shoulder, and there, almost hidden beneath layers of mud, she finds shattered pieces of another vehicle's headlight glass, scattered like fragments of a broken secret. She touches them and the truth crashes over her in a wave so fierce she nearly collapses. Someone else had been on the road, someone who vanished, leaving her behind to face the nightmare alone. She looks into the dark horizon, her heart pounding with a mix of terror and new purpose, and as wind sweeps across the empty stretch, Mara vows to uncover the truth even if it destroys what remains of her life. The final revelation comes days later when the detective calls her back, bringing news that turns her blood cold. They traced the headlight fragments to a vehicle registered to someone she knows, someone who would never have been suspected, a man who had left their home only minutes before Mara and Billy fought, a man whose silence always felt too controlled, too precise. Her brother-in-law Ethan, the quiet shadow in Billy's family, the one who offered comfort after every argument, the one who insisted Mara should drive home alone that night, claiming Billy needed space. But now the pieces align in a terrifying mosaic. Ethan had followed her, driven drunk himself, drifted across the dark road and struck Billy before fleeing into the night, leaving Mara to believe the horror was her own doing. The detective says Ethan confessed when confronted, his voice empty, his explanation colder still. He had wanted to stop Billy from leaving with Mara, to end the chaos between them, but panic swallowed him after the impact. Mara feels the ground vanish beneath her, grief twisting into something indescribable as she realizes the depth of the tragedy, not born from her own hands but from a betrayal lurking closer than she ever imagined. And in that final moment the audience learns the truth, that the greatest horrors are not always the ones we remember but the ones hidden behind the people we trust. Night settles over the Ellison home like a shroud of smoke, drifting through every hallway, and Mara wanders inside with footsteps soft as whispers, her mind trembling beneath the weight of everything she has learned, each memory now tinged with a darker meaning she did not see before. She runs her fingers across Billy's jacket still hanging by the door, and a shiver ripples through her. She hears echoes of moments she once dismissed, Ethan lingering too long in conversations, offering help she never asked for, appearing at their gatherings with eyes that watched too closely, and now each subtle gesture feels sharpened as though hiding an intent she never imagined. As she moves deeper into the house she feels something pull her toward the study, a room Billy kept locked except for rare occasions. She pushes the door open, her breath tightening as dust dances through the faint lamplight. Scattered papers cover the desk, old notes scribbled in Billy's hurried handwriting, and she notices a folder tucked beneath them marked only with a single word, silence. Her pulse thrums as she opens it, revealing pages of messages, receipts and recordings, all hinting at a tension between Billy and Ethan stretching back months, whispers of financial strain, arguments about loyalty and warnings Billy never had the chance to explain. Mara sinks into the chair as dread coils around her heart, realizing Billy had been trying to protect her from a truth he feared might destroy them both, and now the shadows swirling around this tragedy seem deeper, bloodier, and far from over. The detective arrives the next morning, his expression carved from stone, and Mara knows before he speaks that something has shifted again, something pulling the investigation down an even darker path. He lays a small black device on the table, a dash cam pulled from Ethan's car, and his voice lowers as he explains they recovered partial footage, though most of it had been wiped minutes after the crash, perhaps intentionally, perhaps out of desperation. Mara leans closer, her heartbeat drumming in her ears. As the detective presses play, the grainy footage flickers to life, showing the road, the curve, the approaching headlights, and then a sudden lurch, the camera jerking wildly as Ethan swerves. Mara waits for the moment of impact, but instead she sees Billy step into the road, waving his arms, shouting something inaudible before Ethan clips him, the camera spinning to darkness. But there is one more sound, faint but unmistakable, a second car accelerating behind them at impossible speed, and the detectives Voice tightens as he reveals a startling discovery: the tire marks at the scene matched not 2 but 3 vehicles, which means someone else was there, someone who may have witnessed everything or worse orchestrated it. Mara feels her entire world tilt again, the mystery expanding like a black hole, swallowing every assumption she held, and she realizes the truth may be far more complicated than a single tragic mistake. Driven by a storm of grief, fear, and determination, Mara returns once more to the highway, this time guided by a fragile thread of intuition that refuses to release her. She walks along the narrow shoulder, listening to the hum of distant traffic, and then she sees it, a small twisted piece of metal lodged beneath the guardrail, glinting faintly in the fading light. She crouches, lifting it with trembling hands, and recognizes the emblem immediately. It belongs to a luxury car owned by a man Billy once exposed in a workplace scandal, a man whose reputation collapsed because of Billy's testimony, a man with motive, opportunity, and now a piece of evidence linking him to the night that shattered her life. Mara races to the detective, gripping the fragment like a lifeline as she explains everything, her voice shaking yet stronger than it has been since the night of the crash. The detective studies the emblem, his eyes narrowing with the realization that this case reaches far deeper than family betrayal, weaving into revenge, threats, and hidden grudges that Billy had tried to shield her from. Mara stands silent as the weight of this new truth rises through the room, and the final question hangs heavy in the air: if multiple people wanted Billy's silence, then who truly delivered the fatal blow, and how many secrets still lie waiting in the dark?